In 1968, Congress established the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars as the nation's memorial to the 28th president. Since then, the center has worked to bring policymakers and scholars together in pursuit of better public policy. This week on Dialogue, Living Memorial, the Woodrow Wilson Center. Hello again and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. I'm John Molesky. Each week, Dialogue explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. This week, we'll speak with two of the senior members of the Wilson Center staff to learn more about its mission and work. A little later in the program, we'll hear from high school students who join us in the studio. They've traveled to Washington from Alaska, California, Georgia, Texas, and Utah to participate in the Close-Up Academy program. Welcome to all of you. We look forward to hearing your questions and comments a little later. Our guests for today are Cynthia Arnson. Cynthia is director of the Wilson Center's Latin America program, and Rob Litwak. Rob is vice president for programs and director of international security studies at the center. I want to welcome both of you back to Dialogue.
Thank you very much.
You know, I thought we should start with the preliminaries on the gentleman from whom this center received its name, President Wilson. And Rob, if we could begin with you, why would the United States Congress decide to honor this president in this way?
Well, Woodrow Wilson was the 28th president of the United States. He is consistently ranked by historians as being one of our most important presidents. And in the early 1960s, the founding father of the Woodrow Wilson Center, the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, persuaded President Kennedy that it would be fitting that the country create a memorial to Woodrow Wilson to memorialize his work. And that culminated in the legislation of 1968. Woodrow Wilson was president of Princeton University, and he was also president of the United States, the only president to have a PhD. So the thinking was that the fitting memorial for Wilson would be a living memorial which could bring together the worlds of learning and public affairs. The Wilson Center has the same legal status as the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, but as a former director of the center put it, the Wilson Center is a memorial for people, not pigeons. It's a living memorial where people come to discuss the most important issues facing this country and the international community.
Let's talk a bit about the mission. Cindy, begin with you. What is the direction? Not for pigeons, for people. What do we want people to do here?
Right. Well, I think the central mission is to serve as a bridge between the worlds of public policy and the worlds of scholarship. And the idea is not to come up with a list of policy recommendations that anyone who is in the policy world can take away and run with, but rather to make public policy smarter, essentially, to expose people who are in decision-making positions in the U.S. government and around the world to the reflection and the ideas of people who spend their lives studying things. And the sense is through that kind of impartial and balanced reflection that public policy will in fact become better and better informed.
An important point that Cindy makes, Rob, is not advocating any particular policy. People often make a mistake and think of the Wilson Center as a think tank. While it has a lot in common with think tanks, this is a significant difference.
It is. We do receive public funds through an annual appropriation from the Congress. The center is non-advocacy, but it is policy relevant. Senator Moynihan once said that how we think about the world affects how we act in the world. So the mission of the Wilson Center is, as Cindy suggested, to improve the quality of public policy debate. It's not advocating what should be done, but rather, here's how you should think about the issue. Here's a range of considerations, historical context, the cultural context of an issue that needs to be taken into account to lead to better decision-making by our elected officials.
How does the center go about selecting its areas of inquiry?
The center has a programmatic structure. We have 23 programs covering all regions of the world and most important issues, the functional issues that you could think of, whether it be the environment or security studies. And those programs are headed up by distinguished experts in the field like Cynthia Arnson in Latin America. And they, working in consultation with other members of staff, our president, Lee Hamilton, our board of trustees, works out a work plan. We have a small staff. We can't do everything, so we have to make decisions about what we think are the most important issues where we can make a contribution, get some traction on the policy debate, bring some added value to it.
Cindy, let's delve in a bit to the Latin America program and talk to us about it, how you find your scholars or how they find you, how you decide what issues or events or things or historical things you'll be looking at.
Sure. Well, there's a difference, I think, between the kinds of events we do and the scholars that come here. There's an annual fellowship competition where people apply from all over the world, and then there are panels, including a panel of our board of directors that select approximately between 20 and 25 scholars that are here in residence for the equivalent of an academic year for essentially September to May. And in addition, the standing programs sponsor research and hold seminars and conferences along themes and topics that are really seen as the most critical for their region and for the relationship between their region and the United States. So for example, in the Latin American program, we look a lot at how to consolidate democracy in a region that had a history of authoritarian government in the 1970s and that has made a transition to democracy, but where democracy is really threatened in a number of places. So we examine in depth questions such as crime and violence and organized crime. We look at questions of poverty and inequality and the way that democratic governments have performed in order to create a buy-in among the citizens of a society. And then in terms of international relations, we also focus very distinctly on questions of trade relations between the United States and Latin American countries, and in particular why free trade agreements have become so controversial, not only in the United States, but in Latin America as well. And one of the things that we can do by the very nature of being the Wilson Center and not trying to come up with a set of policy prescriptions is get people on all sides of a particular debate into a room at one time. And that's a really distinct way, I think, or an important way that we differ from other institutions in town that tend to have an audience that reflects more or less sympathies with, the particular ideological position that the institution has. And we have the benefit of providing that kind of neutral space where people from all sides can come together and on some occasions really hear each other for the first time. And we think that that's a very, very important bridging function, not only within the policy world, but between, policy and scholarly communities.
Rob, how difficult is it to thread that needle, to delve into these issues and not choose partisan sides?
Well, it's a difficult task, and I think the staff here have our, so to speak, antennae well tuned to try to frame issues in a way that is appropriate to this institution and to bring the right expertise to bear. Just to amplify on what Cindy said, much of what we do is by way of context. The Soviet Union no longer exists. There now is a country again, Russia, which had existed in the 19th century before the Russian Revolution. What does that mean? That we're dealing with Russian foreign policy, not a Soviet foreign policy. So we would bring a historian to Washington to be at the Wilson Center, and we'd look at what was Russian foreign policy during the Tsarist era. But we select individuals who are willing to then use that history as a tool of analysis to look ahead. Now that Russian foreign policy is being renationalized, what are the echoes of the past that one sees in the current policy? That's a perspective that we can bring to Washington through our residential fellows program. And we perform this mission similarly through our meetings. We host some 800 meetings a year. We are a place of convocation, as Cindy suggested. We are neutral turf. We're physically located in between the White House and the Capitol. We are able to bring people together. When people participate in Wilson Center meetings, they know that they are not being fed a pre-cooked conclusion. We provide the responsible perspectives across a range of issues. We wouldn't bring a flat earther to one of our meetings, or someone who denied the Holocaust or something like that. But within the conventional, accepted bounds of the debate, we bring people to the table for an exchange. Often they don't have these types of exchanges except through the facility of the Wilson Center, and we allow individuals to draw their own conclusions. It's very much the aim is to generate light, not heat.
You know, I've had a long association with the center, but I've only been on the payroll for a short time, and I'm still amazed at that number, 800 meetings a year. It's staggering, the level of activity. 25 this week alone.
Yes.
And who attends the meetings? Who is the audience for these activities?
Well, I think there's a broad range, and it varies from program to program. But the outreach that we do, for example, in the Latin American program, is to people in the executive branch, to congressional staff. We have no illusions that members of Congress will actually come and listen in. To people
There's Wilson
who
on the Hill.
There is Wilson on the Hill, and we can talk about that. There are people from international financial institutions, from the World Bank, from the IMF, from the United Nations Development Program. People from foreign embassies, from Latin American embassies that are here, from European embassies, as well as people who work for non-governmental organizations,
I've seen university
area
students,
universities, students,
press.
Media, exactly. So it's a pretty diverse audience, and I think it varies from topic to topic.
Give us some more insight into the ways that the various research is represented, books, Wilson Quarterly. Just give us sort of the outreach overview.
Well, it's across the full spectrum. I mean, we conduct these 800 meetings a year. They result most immediately in meeting reports that are published, which appear on our website. Quite often, presentations are presented in written form. They're pulled together in edited volumes published by the center. Our residential fellows do their own research projects, and many of those are published as books by the center. There's the Wilson Quarterly, which is, I think, the largest popular magazine of its kind, next to Foreign Affairs magazine, that again addresses sort of the world of ideas reflected in the mission of the Woodrow Wilson Center. The website, and even we are moving into the new technologies for dissemination, podcasts, etc. There's a wide range of dissemination, and the center's meetings reflect various constituencies that come together as appropriate. So we could have a small meeting, say, with someone from the government who wants to meet quietly with a group of people just to get input from experts, but in a low-key, off-the-record manner. We do large public meetings. I think the center makes a special effort in framing issues in a distinctive way that's appropriate to the mission of the center, but also in getting the right people in the room. And I think our reputation is such that we've been successful in meeting that criterion. And the hope is that those who attend the meetings will have what in the U.S. government they call a takeaway, some perspective on an issue. A question I hear quite often is, well, what's the policy implication of that meeting? And my response will be, well, the policy implication is take that context into account if you're going to be making decisions on this issue. You said threading the needle. It's somewhat subtle, the mission of the center, because we're not trying to change it. We're non-advocacy, and it's trying to bring to bear considerations that are often neglected in the Washington policy debate, but which are critically important. If I could go on just to give one other example. Sure, I work on the National Security Council staff dealing with nonproliferation. A colleague of mine in the mid-90s was going to Pakistan to deal with the Pakistan nuclear program, and we were talking about the issue, and I said, well, what would be useful for you to take on this trip? And he said, I don't need another widget study. I don't need someone from a think tank telling us things about the nature of the Pakistan nuclear program, which we know much better from our own intelligence community. He says what I would find very useful would be just a straight-ahead book Why does Pakistan think it needs nuclear weapons? What are the security threats they feel? What's the political culture of Pakistan that has led them to conclude that that nuclear weapons are the answer to their security problem? Is it prestige or what? And that's very much what one of my colleagues would call the sweet spot of the Wilson Center. It's sort of looking at these types of issues, framing a context. There are very competent people in government who could provide that perspective. But unfortunately, they're often drawn into like preparing talking points for tomorrow's meeting, next week's meeting, and it's hard for them to do. So I think there is a niche there for the Wilson Center that we've filled. But it's, as I've described, it's somewhat of a subtle sell.
And I let you, those of you watching on MHZ, know that all of these meetings, or the vast majority of these meetings, are available on the website as streaming video. So the resource is amazing, and it's there for you. And now we're going to introduce you to students, as I mentioned in the open, who join us from the Close Up Academy program, and we'll hear what's on their mind. And hi, you're first.
I'm Erica from Utah. Well, I kind of got there. It was like a school, right? Like for after college and stuff. Like it's just a bunch of scholars. But like, are you trying to, like, when you're coming up for all these ideas, or you're trying to like influence Congress to go towards something, or like what are you?
I would say inform versus influence is probably the operative word, but
right. Well, again, I think that the idea is to make the policy consideration more informed and smarter in a lot of ways by providing a lot of background and expertise that that people would not necessarily be exposed to just in the course of their normal job. And I think, you know, a lot of you will see, you know, for better or for worse, that you know, as you enter the workplace, your job gets defined along certain lines, and you have a certain routine and certain expectations and certain things that you have to produce, and it doesn't always give you an opportunity to think broadly. And I think that that's what we're trying to do. In terms of the Hill, we do have a very active Wilson Center on the Hill program that takes the programs and the expertise here and organizes things right on Capitol Hill so that congressional staffers can come without having to, you know, go very far. So that's a very important form of outreach.
You know, Rob mentioned the president of the organization, Lee Hamilton, a former member of Congress, who I've heard him speak to groups like yours and talk about how it's changed. Being a member of Congress is much more difficult now because the amount of issues that are highly technical and complex are greater than when he served, and that you need a source of information that's not somebody lobbying for something, that's just someone trying to provide straight information. Thanks.
Okay.
Go ahead. You're next, please. How are you?
Hi, my name is Chris, and I'm from Georgia. And I had a question. I wanted to know, how will the war on Al-Qaeda benefit those who have lost sons, daughters, mothers, and husbands and wives overseas here in America?
The war on, I'm sorry, say that again, the war on Al-Qaeda?
The war on Al-Qaeda, how would the Americans here who have lost loved ones and sons and daughters overseas, how would they benefit from this war on Al-Qaeda?
Well, we, of course, sustained over 3,000 fatalities on September 11th, which led to the subsequent events, most immediately the decision to intervene in Afghanistan to topple the Taliban regime in Kabul, which had provided safe haven to al-Qaeda to operate. Afghanistan had become not a state sponsor of terrorism, but actually a terrorist-sponsored state by al-Qaeda. And since 9/11, we've witnessed interventions in not only in Afghanistan and in Iraq, but in other countries. I think the Wilson Center's made a contribution to the debate through a series of meetings that my program sponsors on terrorism. And we've tried to look at the full range of issues that are important for policymakers to take into account. States of mind. What possesses people to join terrorist organizations, extremist groups? What are the roles of countries that either are permissive or passive sponsors of these organizations, or which have weak capacity and can't control their own territory? And an organization like al-Qaeda is able to operate in it. So we've, through our meetings, attempted to shed light on the character of al-Qaeda, which has changed since 9/11. It was attacked and essentially really put out of operation in Afghanistan, and since then it is dispersed to other countries. What's the current status of al-Qaeda? How centralized is its operation? All of with the intent of providing clarity to understanding the terrorist threat, which indirectly feeds into trying to make this homeland a safer place.
Thanks. Hi. You've had your mic adjusted. You're on.
Yes. Hi, I'm Daniela Barajas from Houston, Texas. And my question is, how do the discoveries and the information provided from here have an impact on the government? How much of an impact do they have on people who are biased towards one side?
Yeah.
It's a very difficult issue to measure, and I think a lot of the measurements that we have are much more subjective in terms of who comes to attend and the range of perspectives that they are exposed to. But I can give you a concrete example. Earlier this year, our Mexico Institute put out a report on Mexican-U.S. bilateral relations and talked about, the forging of a strategic partnership. And the Obama administration, and particularly President Obama in his first trip to Mexico, used those words, strategic partnership, as a way of defining the relationship, rather than saying we're going to talk to you about trade and we're going to talk to you about drugs and we're going to talk to you about immigration. We're going to look at these things in a much more coherent fashion, and see Mexico as really a strategic partner, as opposed from the various tactical kinds of arrangements that are made on particular issues.
Hi, go ahead, please.
Hi, my name's Abby, and I'm from Texas. You said you were the president for the Latin American department. Mm-hmm. What are the different departments here, and what are the differences between the departments?
Boy, we have a lot of them, so I don't know if we can get through all of them.
I'll basically run through. I mean, in the geographic regions, there's the Kennan Institute that looks at Russia. There is an Africa program, a Middle East program, an Asia program, a China Institute, a Mexico Institute, a Brazil Institute, a program on environmental change and security, Rob's program on international studies, a program on changes in the global economy, one on science and technology. So those are that I think gives you a sense of the breadth of the. Were you counting, Rob? Who did she leave out? I left out a lot, but I think it gives you a sense of, There
are 23 programs or more, covering all regions and functional issues, and I think one issue that arises for this organization, like any other organization, whether it's a university or the government, is how do you get the different departments to work together? And particularly across issues and across regions, and this is an ongoing process. We're making a concerted effort. I think one dimension that we've brought to bear very significantly in the policy debate here is some of our comparative research. In my area of nonproliferation, quite often one sees in government that the people who work on North Korea may not talk to the people who work on Iran. So we can bring together experts from different countries and say, well, what are the lessons of how we dealt with the Libyan nuclear challenge that could be applied in dealing with Iran or not, taking into account, the unique circumstances in each country. Yeah, the connecting of the dots could be a very valuable outcome. Mm-hmm. Hi.
Hi, my name is Tiana, and I'm also from Texas. I wanted to know, what does the Woodrow Wilson Center think is going to have to happen in order for us, United States, to get our troops back out from Afghanistan and Iraq? What's going to happen to make a withdrawal happen?
There's a big question.
Well, the President of the United States is obviously going to be making decisions about the future of U.S. deployment in Afghanistan. The Wilson Center doesn't take positions on issues. We bring people to the institution either through our basic research program, which is our fellowship program, which we've just got, or through the meetings to address this and other issues. Our activities would focus on what are the inputs into the decision making. For example, in the case of Afghanistan, one could look at Afghanistan through the optic of a civil war, that you have the Pashtuns, an ethnic group, fighting against some of the ethnic groups that reside in the north and the west of the country. And that's one overlay of the conflict. We would have experts that would look at sort of the ethnic composition of the country and what is the disposition of these different parties to the possibility of a national government. As a sort of one example, we have experts in residence now who've focused on counterinsurgency in other parts of the world. There's a debate about whether the United States should pursue a counterinsurgency policy in Afghanistan to control territories and populations, or rather whether we should focus on a counterterrorism strategy focused just on attacking Al-Qaeda, which is the organization that attacked the United States. And here again, we could bring experts who have looked at counterinsurgencies in Kosovo or in other contingencies in the past and say, well, what lessons can we draw from that would be pertinent to the Afghan case? That's really what our niche is. And we hope, we believe there's value added in that perspective to the debate.
A technical question I think that people are always interested in. How's the center funded?
It's a public-private partnership. We are an affiliated agency of the Smithsonian Institution. Congress permits the Kennedy Center, the Smithsonian, the National Gallery to mix public and private funds. Our federal appropriation this year is $12 million out of a total of $30 million, and the rest remaining, the private side of the center's budget is raised from foundations, private individuals, some corporate money. But I think one of the important factors that bear on your question is the relationship between ideas and money in Washington. Mm-hmm. And I think we are fortunate in having the federal appropriation that covers what in business terms would be our fixed costs. And having those fixed costs covered allows us then to leverage our position vis-a-vis other funders, so that they know that they're not funding the infrastructure, et cetera, that their money goes into the meat of the activities, but it also provides us a basis, this core funding, to say no and push back if a funder tries in any way to intrude some special interest agenda onto us, to foist it onto us, and we would say no to that. And we're able to say no and push back in a way I think that other institutions that maybe in different financial circumstances find more difficult to do.
Yeah, another valuable advantage. Well, Cindy, Rob, thanks for joining us. Next week we're going to come back with a second part of this discussion about the Wilson Center, where we'll look at a particular program that we're working on. But right now we're out of time. And in addition to thanking our guests and the Close-Up Academy students, we want you to know that we appreciate your comments and encourage you to share them with us. You can do so by sending email to dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. And if you'd like to learn more about the Close-Up Academy and its programs, you can visit them on the web at www.closeup.org. Until next week, for all of us at the Wilson Center and Dialogue, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for watching.
Dialogue is a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHZ Networks. Dialogue is available via broadcast, cable, satellite, and telco on MHZ Worldview throughout the United States. To see how to watch where you live, visit www.mhznetworks.org.